Hi, my name is Steve Staniels, and welcome to another episode of Screw the Clout. We have an amazing guest today. Um, you know, um, the list of again, I'm so amazed as I'm looking at the list of achievements. This is probably one of our biggest overachievers, and again, somebody who is a New York City police officer. Uh, I give big kudos to special forces. Anybody who does anything, it puts their lives on the line. This gentleman was a U.S. Marine. He fought in Operation Iraqi Freedom. He's went over post-stress syndrome by developing a running habit. Wrote books. He's a author. This guy's even going to solo, if you could believe this, go across the Antarctic. I don't know where that's coming from, but we're going to get into that. I want to welcome Akshay Nanavati. It's such a pleasure today to have you on the podcast. I don't even know where we were going to begin with all this stuff because you even got endorsed on your book by the Dalai Lama. And personally, one of my favorite guys is Jack Canfield, which we're going to talk about as well. So,
absolutely.
How does this whole story begin? I mean, let's just kind of begin because a lot of our listeners are upcoming entrepreneurs, people that have overcome things, people that are trying to, that are stuck and don't want to make the next steps.
Yeah.
And you've kind of done that all, right? Because you've had some stumbling blocks along the way, and you've taken that and you've made that even a positive. So
absolutely.
Let's start when you kind of went to become in the U.S. Marines. Is that something you always wanted to aspire to do? Is it something you fell into? Is it just something that was like an opportunity that nothing else was happening? So how did it begin?
It definitely wasn't something I always want to do. In fact, I wasn't born in the U.S. I was born in India. I didn't move to the
another
U.S.
amazing thing.
Yeah, I didn't move to the U.S. till I was 13. I had lived in two different cities in India and then Singapore, and moved to Austin, Texas when I was about 13. And very quickly after moving here, it's like about 15, 16 years old, I got very heavily into drugs, into alcohol. I still have these scars on my arm and a burn mark here from just being a very self-destructive, cutting myself, burning myself, doing an absurd amount of drugs. And I lost two friends to addiction as well. And I was going down. Sorry, jump in.
No, please. No, I don't mean to interrupt. Just to stop you. When you say you were doing drugs, what, if you don't mind sharing, what type of drugs did you fall into?
So started with just marijuana and drinking, and then me and one of my friends, we were the first to start going into a little harder stuff. So we got into LSD and then cocaine. And he actually was he started going into heroin, but thankfully I was at a point in my life that I would have done any drug that came my way. And I wanted to try it all. But thankfully more did not come my way because my friend, he went down that path, he OD'd and died. But I managed to get out earlier than that because what happened was, and this is what leads me to getting in the Marines, was I saw the movie Black Hawk Down. You ever seen that movie?
Of course, one of my favorite movies.
That movie touched my soul. Watching that movie and watching those men, specifically that scene where those two Delta snipers, Gary Gordon and Randy Sugar, they volunteered to go on the ground to set up a defensive perimeter to protect the second Black Hawk that crashed. And they both died for Michael Durant, who's still alive today because of what they did. And they received the Medal of Honor posthumously for their valor. That triggered something in me. Just watching that, I mean, the kind of courage to do that, to put your life on the line for another, and watching that movie, after watching it, I read the book Black Hawk Down and then just started devouring book after book after book on military and life in combat. And that was it. Almost overnight, in that phase there, very quickly, I stopped doing drugs, stopped drinking temporarily, at least because I struggled with drinking later on in my life. And I decided to join the Marines. That was the trigger that birthed everything who I am today and changed my life for the better.
Now, before we get to the whole Marine thing, and not to play psychologist, what was the reason or the trigger that was making you so self-destructive when you were a kid?
Great question. I didn't come from sort of a bad upbringing. My parents were outstanding. I'm very close to them. We weren't extremely wealthy at the time, but we certainly weren't poor. So I'd say middle class upbringing. But moving around a lot. When I had moved from at 13, I had lived in 4 different cities, 3 different countries. As a result of that, and today I'm very grateful for all the life experiences, but at the time, I moved around a lot, so I became very adaptable. But the sort of the shadow, every strength has a shadow, and the shadow of that adaptability is you're very impressionable, especially as a young child who
Sure.
doesn't have a path in life, doesn't know what you want yet, right? So I got it, and I don't today, especially, I don't blame anybody else for I take responsibility for my actions. But as a young child, you're very impressionable. So I got into a group of friends where that was the vehicle for expression. So I became the one kind of pushing the line. I was known as the crazy one, you know. I was
Right.
doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and drugs was simply that vehicle. Because my parents have asked me this today too, you know, what could we have done differently? And I think had I got into the kind of things that I do now, mountain climbing, outdoor sports, ultra running, I would have gone down that path, you know, and gone ham into that. But at a young age, I didn't even know all these things that I do now were things people do. You know, you don't know what you don't know. So that was just being very lost and getting into that community, and then pushing that line and looking and having that be my kind of, in a way, the same thing I do now. But today, obviously, it's a very positive way that I'm expressing myself and exploring edges. But drugs was my vehicle to explore those edges.
Wow. So you watch this movie. Again, very impressionable. I still always bother me when they have the Marine and they're kicking him, right? When remember that
Mhm.
he's dead and they're all kicking and they're
Yeah.
dragging him. That
Mhm.
always stuck with me. But
Yeah.
so you get to the Marines. Now your first day of boot camp. Are you like, what the fuck did I do? Or because again, that you're kind of reformed, you're saying.
Yeah.
You really reformed because you're going from here
Yeah.
to there,
Absolutely.
first
No, it's a
day. So,
good question. Yeah, you know, I when I joined the Marines, firstly, it took me a year and a half to get into the Marines because I have flat feet, I have scoliosis, I have a blood disorder that two doctors told me would kill me in boot camp. Essentially, it transports about 25% less oxygen through my bloodstream. So all these factors were disqualifying conditions, and essentially
right,
that I could not join the military. But this was a post 9/11 world. So here's a young kid who wants to go infantry. We'll find a place for you. You
right,
know,
right, right,
so
right.
I had to fight. The point is that I had to fight for a year and a half just to get into the Marines. So I knew, I mean, I was committed, right? This was my path. There was nothing else I was destined to do. This was my path. But when I did join, I mean, inevitably the first week is quite the shock to the system, right? Everybody
Right.
yelling in your face when you stand on those infamous yellow footprints in Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego, and the drill instructor screaming at you. It was a shock to the system, but I thrived in boot camp. You know, I wasn't the fittest back then because I had sort of relatively quickly after joining the Marines, or soon before that, I was on very heavily into drugs, right? So I wasn't extremely fit. I had started training a bit, but I thrived mentally. So I did struggle physically in boot camp, especially compared to some others, but mentally I thrived. And I actually graduated infantry school as the honor graduate of my platoon because this was my path. This was what I knew I wanted to do, and I loved it. It taught me the beauty of suffering. It taught me the beauty of doing something for the good of the group. You know, in boot camp, when somebody messes up, everybody gets punished for it. So you
Sure.
live and work together as one, and experiencing that, while of course there are many moments it sucks, you're being punished for something you didn't do and all of that, right? You go through those struggles, but it was profoundly beautiful to not only tap into that part within myself. This was the first time now I had gone through such intense suffering and found something in my own spirit, and that we all have within us, to transcend that suffering. And that transcendence laid the foundation for everything I am today. But the Marines birthed that. And so I loved not just the suffering, but what it was giving me access to, as well as the suffering for the men, for the mission, right? You live for something bigger than you. And that's profoundly beautiful.
Right. Right. No, no, it's amazing. I mean, so, yeah, I mean, I've never heard it put that way, quite, but again, that's pretty powerful.
Thank you.
Now, when you go into Operation, the Iraqi Freedom,
Yeah.
how how long was that time frame from when you were in boot camp to you were training? Now they put you somewhere.
Mhm.
What was that time frame before you knew you were headed out there?
It was about 2.5 years later, that after coming out of boot camp
Okay,
and infantry school. So when I came out, I was volunteering to go every chance I could. I wanted to go to war. I signed up infantry, and
they probably thought you were fucking out of your mind. They probably thought you
they
were.
did. It was me and
They
one
say,
other
wait a minute,
buddy of mine.
this guy
Yeah.
fought to get in. They didn't want you. He fought to get in. He thought, suffering in boot camp was like a beautiful experience mentally. And now this guy's trying to fucking find, somewhere to go fight.
Yeah.
Um, you were either very popular with your peers, or they thought you were fucking nuts, which probably made you more popular. But so I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
So
no worries.
Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Yeah, so then 2.5 years later, I finally got activated and got sent out there as an infantry non-commissioned officer. By the time I went, I was a corporal. And so we were in just an area in around the Haditha, Iraq. And when I was out there, I mean, one of my many jobs was to walk in front of our vehicle convoys every time there was a danger zone, like a bridge, for example, and to look for bombs before they could be used to kill me and my fellow Marines. So as you can imagine, this was a pretty dangerous job because me and one other Marine our job was to clear the area to make sure there was no bombs. But if somebody was going to get blown up first, guess who would be, right?
So that again, so that's fun.
Yeah.
That's crazy too. So, take us to the front, and again, this is all great stuff. But take us to the first day you land. You're flying from San Diego, which is probably one of the most beautiful places in the United States. You end up in a desert. What is that first day? What does that look like to you?
So we went through Kuwait into Iraq, but keep in mind that I had been wanting to go here for 2.5 years at this point. So when I got out there, I was like, let's go. This is what I'm here for. And I know it sounds kind of dark, whatever you want to call it.
It makes you who you are.
It's not the sort of I was a quote unquote war junkie, and I was fully aware of the politics of the war as well. I actually was a history major in college, and I had the unique experience of not only having lived it firsthand, but I did a ton of research, so I knew that there was a lot of lies that went into the war. But on the ground, we genuinely were there to help the people, and we were doing a lot of good things on the ground. We wanted to help, the people who had endured so much suffering. So there was this notion of we were there to at least on the ground do some good, but it was in a way also now you're being, because the thing with war, right? War brings out the humanity at its most extremes. So you'll see the absolute worst, people doing awful, horrific things to each other. But you'll also see people doing their absolute best, right? Like people sacrificing their lives for another. You see humanity at its finest and its worst. And living in an environment that brings out the extremes of the human condition this is a weird thing to say about war, but it is beautiful because it is pure. It breaks down the masks that we wear in conventional society that we all put on because we've got to look a certain way and we care about what people think about us. Out there, these masks are shed and you see the human condition at its rawest form. And there's a depth to that is in a way strangely, I would even call it addicting, which is why when I came back from war, I actually wanted to go back. I kept volunteering to go back. And that's why a lot of veterans do struggle when they come back. And I'm sure you can kind of relate to this in your own way as a cop, right? You see the darkest of the human condition, but you're also seeing people putting their lives on the line for the other. So that extreme brings out such a purity without the masks that we wear in conventional society. And it's powerful to tap into that aspect of the human spirit.
Without a doubt. I mean, yeah, I mean, like I said, I can relate on a certain level, but not to the extreme of obviously what you faced or what you saw. Explain the first time that when the shit hit the fan and bullets or any type of warfare was coming at you, and you obviously your associates. What is that like? The first. Yeah. I'm sure it's an adrenaline rush, obviously, like nothing else, because that's why you wanted to go back. I mean, I've played war games, right? Stupid, get with these paint guns, and you get shot, it hurts. But now this is real. You know what I mean? So I'm doing that, and I know it's fake, and I'm my blood, by looking around. So this is this at any point in time you could take off a bit of bullet to the head, or something you don't even foresee. What is that experience like?
It's a really unique thing. Marines are a bit psychotic in this way, because when we went to the war, it was 2007, 2008. So the wars were kind of dying down. So there wasn't sort of Black Hawk Down type firefights happening all the time.
Right.
Almost always we would get pop shots fired at us a lot, but we'd hear rounds go off and the rules of engagement, because mostly we're in civilians' towns, right? This is counterinsurgency warfare. So when we're getting pop shots fired at us, you're not going to just engage because there's civilians everywhere. So the enemy would kind of do this to try to get a hit, kill one of us. but we wouldn't often get it. Wasn't firefights happening. Our biggest threat was the IEDs. So but even with the pop shots, especially, I mean, that was actually one of the frustrations in the first month or so. A lot of us were pissed off that we weren't getting into this shit. So when shots would get fired at us later on, I specifically remember certain incidents. We're standing there like, come on, let's go. You know, we want to get into the shit.
Right, you're trolling now. You're trained for this. You're all
trained
up
for this. Yeah. So there was this frustration that it wasn't as much, because, you know, we got so comfortable with pop shots that they didn't even phase us. We wanted to really get into this. It's as psychotic as it may sound, but our biggest threat was the IEDs. So that was more of a concern. We did have one vehicle in our company got hit. Thankfully, nobody was killed. But our biggest threat was the IEDs. So we did a very good job of finding them before they could be used to kill us. You know, so I personally found fuel canisters rigged with bombs, grenades, things like that. And they had a whole system for how they would set that up. So we had a lot of our big missions were finding these IEDs. And then we would call EOD, which is explosive ordnance disposal, like that movie. I forget off the top of my head.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
me too.
But
I know what you're talking about, though.
All about the Hurt Locker, all about EOD.
Yes.
We would call EOD to kind of dispose of it. But we did have, so again, the biggest thing was the pop shots and IEDs. And I actually didn't find this out till later on when I came back from the war, that apparently my vehicle, it drove over an active bomb. And for some reason, you know, God knows why, it didn't explode. Me and my staff sergeant told me that later. And I didn't know that. I guess I missed that debrief when we were in Iraq, but he was like, yeah, dude, that happened to our vehicle. And I just, that was kind of jarring to think about, because that's a big thing why I struggled when I came back. You know, one of my closest friends, his vehicle, when he was in Iraq, it drove over a bomb, it exploded, and he was killed. And mine, I drove over a bomb, it didn't explode, and I get to live. Why? You know?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't want to get religious to Tony Robbins or anything like that, but you know, sometimes there's a bigger plan for us. You know what I mean? I believe in fate and destiny, and you know, it just wasn't your time. You had more things God wanted you to do. That's just me, and I'm, you know,
I understand. Yeah,
and I don't want to get into that whole thing, because you know, this thing's a little more of a you know, nutty, crazier podcast. But yeah, but yes, I do believe in that. You know what I mean? And
saying that, yeah.
But so you come back now. You know, at what point do you start to endear the whole stress and post trauma stress, and does that come after you come back, or was that caused by the way you were, or is that something that was kind of resonating inside you deep and just happened now to come out?
Yeah, you know, when I came back, I went to college. So I was finishing up my undergrad, and so I was drinking in college, kind of partying in college, that you don't necessarily think of it as a problem, but you're drinking. And I struggled with that right off the bat, because, you know, and today I have a little more self-awareness. So you can't fault people for not knowing what they don't know. We all do the best we can with our awareness and our conditions. But after coming back from war and you hear college students complaining about things, it's a little bit of a hard adjustment. You know, I just forget about what we endured, but what the Iraqi people endured was more hell than most people can fathom, you know?
So people don't have a clue.
Exactly.
They don't have a clue.
I struggled being back here. I wanted to go back to war, but the wars were dying down, so I didn't get a chance. So then I actually went to grad school to get a journalism degree because I wanted to go back to war as a combat journalist. That was the whole intention.
But again,
yeah.
What is it like? And this is where I can never like, you know, once you go and do what you're doing, right, in Iraq, just to come home and then it's like, hey, you know, it's back to like, hey, you know, I got to wake up today, I got to go to the bank, I got to run a couple errands, I got to, you know, that whole thing alone has got to be a big fucking, you know, that's a big, you know, every day you're trying to survive, not knowing if you're gonna, you know, or you know, and you have like this camaraderie.
Yeah.
And now you're home and you're waking up and you're like, oh, you know, you're like everybody else. You know what I mean? People call, you know, beeping at you in the fuck, you know, if you're driving too slow, it's like, that's got to be a big adjustment. It's got to be.
That was one of the hardest things, because to your point, you know, in war is paradoxically a very peaceful experience in a way, for the reasons you mentioned. So if you look at it, right, again, separate from the politics, on the ground, we're doing something meaningful. So there's a mission, there's purpose. We're trying to help people. You have camaraderie. You have your brothers in arms. So you have that belonging that we all seek at the highest level. You're fighting and struggling and suffering and bleeding and dying for each other, right? So this is brothers and camaraderie at nothing, it's hard to match that. Right. So now you have that, not to mention because of the intensity of such an experience, the volume of life is dialed up all the way. So
Right,
when
sure.
you're living at that intensity, it's powerful. If you feel more alive, then suddenly you come back and now the volume of life is dialed way down.
Right.
So I struggled with that. I struggled with, I mean,
Now you're just
I
a
struggled
regular
with the
dude.
survivor's guilt. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. You don't have that camaraderie. I struggled with, why do I get to come back alive? I mentioned I'd lost a friend out there. You know, I couldn't handle being in crowded places, because in Iraq,
Right.
crowded places means people could kill you, right?
Right.
Loud noises. I was constantly hyper vigilant of loud noises. So I would always be very, you know, sort of jumpy. All those things were things I really struggled with in this. Not to mention, I think the biggest thing for me was suddenly there's this, the humanity is now a lot more fake in this world. You
Right.
know, so the purpose had been gone of doing something purposeful, which is why I was wanting to go back, even as a combat journalist, to these very intense environments where suddenly now you get all those forces back up, right? You get meaning, you get camaraderie, you
Right.
get purpose, you get to see the rawness of the human spirit at its most pure form. Suffering has this unique power to bring out the essence of who we are, good, bad, you know, for better or for worse, but it brings that all out without any
Right.
masks. And I
Right.
wanted to go, I didn't know all of this at the time. Like, I wasn't as aware of why I was doing the things that I do now, looking back at it. But that's what was driving me to want to go back to these environments.
But yeah, no, again, when you talk about it like that, yeah, it makes it very understandable. Again,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to throw my 7 years in NYPD
No,
to
that's,
even close. But yes, you do have a camaraderie with the guys.
yeah,
You do miss the guys. You do see shit like you
yeah,
shouldn't see, and
yeah,
then you go home and you're just dad, and or
yeah,
everybody has a regular day. So
yeah,
that's why like a lot of like the captains that when they walk in, everybody salutes them. When they go home, they're just a
yeah,
regular dude. That's why some
yeah.
guys stay on 30 years because they like that.
I understand.
Because 10 minutes ago they were just being saluted by the Chiefs, and now they're going home and the kids are saying,
Yeah, yeah,
"Dad, shut up, Dad. I'm watching TV." You know what I
yeah,
mean? So
yeah.
on a
Absolutely.
much smaller level, I kind of understand.
That's
Um,
very similar.
so
Yeah.
we get back. So now you're suffering through this, and you start running, right? You start doing the whole running thing, and through running, you find that kind of keeps that in check. So how did that even?
Yeah.
Is that something that you just said, "Let me try this," or how does that happen?
So I had started obviously running somewhat while joining the Marines, because you had to
Right, of
get into
course, right,
fitness.
right, of
But
course,
I got exposed to the notion of ultra running, funnily enough, in Iraq. So we didn't have a lot of time off. Our squad in particular was out the wire on missions every single day. In the seven
right.
months, we might have gotten 7 days off. You know, we had a unique squad. Ours was called Weapons Jump. So we're out there all the time. And so, but one of my friends lent me this book called Ultra Marathon Man by Dean Karnazes. And that lit a fire in me. So whenever we had some time off, or even sometimes just to alleviate stress, I would run for hours around our very tiny base in the middle of a war zone, where we could, inside the base you could walk around without flak jackets and Kevlars. So I would run around, and that planted the seed. But when I came back, as I mentioned, I struggled, and the rock bottom moment hit many years after coming back. It was about 2012, 2013. So I came back from the war in 2008. And that's when the drinking took, like, I mean, it got very bad. I was at a point drinking a bottle of vodka a day. I mean, 750 milliliter bottle of
Wow.
vodka, downing it. The next day, I'd pass out, go pick up another one, until my body couldn't take it. And one morning after this 5 day binge drinking session, I woke up, walked over to my kitchen, picked up a knife, and was seconds away from cutting my wrists. That was the moment that it shocked me that I had even gotten so low, you know? So through that, then I started saying, okay, something's clearly gone horribly wrong. I need to do something differently. So I started researching neuroscience, psychology, spirituality, doing that inner work to confront my own demons, to understand my own brain, to understand the nature of trauma and how to reframe it. And from that process of climbing out of the abyss, and it was by no means a smooth climb. I broke my
Oh no.
sobriety more times than I can count, but I climbed out of the abyss, and running and now adventure sports became in many ways my salvation, right? I found peace by doing these things that allowed me to explore the very edges of how far we can go. And by doing that, you're opening doors into the human soul that are very rarely opened. You know, like, the bigger the dragon that you battle, the greater the treasure you unearth.
Of course,
And
of
so I
course.
was seeking out the biggest dragon I could find, which is what now leads me to this journey that I'm about to embark upon, 110 days alone in Antarctica. But that's what got me into ultra running. I've run many ultra marathons, got me into mountain climbing or polar travel and pushing these edges. But it wasn't, so just also because it wasn't as a way to escape from my demons. Initially, it was, but later on, as I went through my own healing and consciousness journey, it was more not just as an escape, but a seeking. It led me to what else can I unearth in the human soul? What are those treasures out there? So I even did, just beyond physical feats, I've spent first 7 days and 10 days sitting completely in a dark room. As dark, I mean, so dark you cannot see your hand in front of it.
Aaron Rodgers did that. They thought he was nuts.
Yeah. Actually, so Aaron Rodgers got inspired by Aubrey Marcus, and Aubrey Marcus went to the dark room after my interview with him. So
oh, that's funny.
Yeah, I did an interview with Aubrey Marcus, and that's what had led to the darkness retreat that Aubrey had went to. Was the same place that I went to in Germany. So it was kind of, there's kind of a connection in some small ways there.
Let me ask you a question about that. And I don't want to veer off too much because I know because they keep us with a certain time limit, all my sponsors. But what did you get out of the dark room experience?
The biggest thing I would say was an understanding of the non-dualistic nature of the human condition. And what I mean by that, very viscerally, in the dark room the first time, when I think about 5 days in, it was a 7-day darkness retreat, I saw the brightest white light I've ever experienced in my entire life. It was so bright, it was blinding me. I was covering my eyes because I couldn't tell if they were, like I was trying to block this light, sitting in a dark room. I was touching my eyelids because I couldn't tell if it was open or closed. And then when I came out of the darkness, the first moment when I looked at the light after 7 days in dark, I had never seen the luminosity of the world look that way. And in a very visceral way, I started to feel this tremendous amount of gratitude for all the suffering I've ever experienced in my life, because I realized in a very concrete and very, ingrained way that you cannot fully appreciate the light unless you've first been in the dark. And so it hit me that, all the dualities in the human experience, there's pain, pleasure, masculine, feminine, stress, recovery, fear, nirvana, darkness, light. We often demonize one side as bad, right? Darkness is bad, the pain is bad, stress is bad, fear is bad. But these are not bad. They can only exist with the other. You can't have a summit without a valley. And so that's what taught me that in a much more expanded and conscious way, that all the forces in the human experience, all these seemingly contradictory ideals, which is what led me to my book Fearvana as well, is that fear and nirvana are not opposites. They can coexist. And in fact, darkness and light must coexist, and we must find that alignment within to find a true spiritual awakening. And that's what led me to even running, is that, all these things that I do is the suffering you seek out allows you to appreciate greater joy. When you seek out deeper pain, you'll know greater pleasure, right? It's the duality that coexists in the human condition.
Right. So Aaron Rodgers wasn't a fucking nut job when he did that. He actually,
it's a profoundly beautiful experience.
They killed Aaron. They killed Aaron Rodgers for that for a while.
I'm not too sure. I haven't followed. I know he went.
No, but I'm just saying. Obviously.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, it's just funny because that was a big goof joke for a while that he did that. But
it's a very spiritual experience. I could not.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure, and he's a really smart guy.